A millionaire decides to marry a maid to get revenge on his ex-wife. His former spouse had left him for his best friend. The future surprised everyone when they discover the maid's secret. An unlikely romance was about to emerge from an extremely improbable scenario. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of the luxurious penthouse, illuminating the determined face of Richard Morgan. At 35 years old, the successful businessman watched New York City awaken, his eyes fixed on the horizon filled with skyscrapers. His reflection in the window revealed an attractive man with striking features and a gaze that mixed ambition and hurt. Holding a cup of espresso, Richard recalled the events that had brought him here. 6 months ago, his life seemed perfect. He was about to marry Elizabeth, the woman he believed to be the love of his life, and his technology company was about to go public. The future had never looked so promising. Until one fateful night, everything crumbled. "Mr. Morgan?" The voice of Mrs. Wilson, his housekeeper for over a decade, interrupted his thoughts. "Breakfast is served." Richard turned, offering a polite but distant smile. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be there in a moment." As he walked towards the dining room, his steps echoed through the empty apartment. The loneliness was palpable, a constant reminder of what he had lost, or rather what had been taken from him. Sitting at the meticulously set table, Richard barely touched the elaborate meal in front of him. His appetite, like his confidence, had been shaken on that night he caught Elizabeth in the arms of Greg, his best friend and business partner. The double betrayal had left him devastated. He had not only lost his fiancée, but also the man he considered a brother. The impact on his personal and professional life had been immense. The planned merger between their companies fell through, and the rumors in social circles were incessant. But Richard Morgan was not a man to be defeated for long. The initial pain gave way to something darker, a burning desire for revenge. It was then that the plan began to take shape in his mind. A plan as audacious as it was perverse. A plan that would not only restore his reputation, but also serve as a lesson to those who dared to betray him. "Mrs. Wilson," he called, his voice echoing through the room. The housekeeper appeared promptly. "Yes, sir. I need you to contact some employment agencies. I'm looking for a new maid." Martha frowned, confused. "But, sir, I thought you were satisfied with our current staff." Richard smiled, a calculating gleam in his eyes. "Oh, don't worry. It's not for work here. I have a special project in mind." In the days that followed, Richard immersed himself in his search. He didn't want just any maid. He needed someone specific, a young woman of humble origins without significant family connections. Someone who could be easily molded and eventually discarded. After weeks of searching, he finally found what he was looking for. Emily Davis, 25 years old, born in rural Kentucky. An orphan, raised by a distant aunt, she had moved to New York in search of opportunities. Her resume was a list of temporary jobs and incomplete courses. Perfect. Richard scheduled an interview, eager to put his plan into action. When Emily entered his office, he had to contain a smile of satisfaction. She was exactly as he had imagined. Simple, shy, clearly impressed by the luxury surrounding her. "Miss Davis," he began, his voice smooth and calculated. "Tell me about yourself." Emily, nervous, began to recite her work history, but Richard gently interrupted her. No. Tell me about you, your dreams, your aspirations." Surprised by the question, Emily hesitated for a moment. "Well, I've always dreamed of having a better life. Studying, maybe. Seeing new places." Richard nodded, feigning interest. "And what's stopping you?" "Money, mainly," she admitted, blushing slightly. "And opportunities, of course." It was at this moment that Richard cast his bait. "And if I offered you both?" Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Richard explained his proposal. A job as his personal assistant. The salary would be generous, far beyond what she had ever dreamed of. There would be travel, new clothes, the chance to attend high society events. "But why me?" asked Emily, clearly suspicious of such luck. Richard already had his answer prepared. "I see potential in you, Emily. Sometimes all someone needs is an opportunity. I'm willing to give you that chance." What he didn't say, of course, were his true intentions, how he planned to use Emily as a pawn in his game of revenge, how he intended to transform her into a symbol of his rise and Elizabeth and Greg's fall. Emily, unaware that she was about to enter a nest of vipers, accepted the offer with tears in her eyes. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Richard invested heavily in Emily's transformation: etiquette classes, shopping sessions at exclusive boutiques, visits to renowned beauty salons. Gradually, the simple girl from the countryside gave way to a sophisticated and elegant woman. But for Richard, this was just the beginning. His plan went far beyond a simple transformation. He intended to elevate Emily to the status of his fiancée, introduce her to society as his new love, and then would come the sweetest part of his revenge. What Richard didn't know, however, was that behind those seemingly innocent eyes, Emily harbored her own secrets. While he saw her as a piece on his chessboard, she silently observed, learned, and planned. One night, while Richard was working in his home office, he heard a soft melody coming from the living room. Intrigued, he approached quietly. There was Emily, sitting at the piano he barely used, her fingers dancing over the keys with surprising skill. The music, a complex piece by Chopin, filled the room. For a moment Richard was paralyzed, a mixture of surprise and suspicion taking over him. How could a simple maid play like this? When the music ceased, he cleared his throat, making Emily startle. "I didn't know you played," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Emily smiled timidly. "Oh, it's just a hobby. I learned a little as a child." Richard nodded, but a seed of doubt had been planted. There was more to Emily than he had initially thought. And this, he realized, could be both an advantage and a danger to his plans. As he returned to his office, Richard decided he would need to watch Emily more closely. His revenge plan was too perfect to be compromised by unexpected variables. What he didn't realize was that slowly the roles were beginning to reverse. While he thought he was in control, it was Emily who was silently gaining ground. The battle of intelligence and cunning was just beginning, and the outcome promised to be very different from what Richard Morgan had planned. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled under the light of hundreds of crystals. New York's elite circulated among champagne flutes and elaborate canapes, their laughter and conversations creating a symphony of opulence and power. At the center of this social whirlwind, Richard Morgan smiled, his hand firmly entwined with Emily's. "Remember," he whispered, leaning close to her ear, "tonight is crucial. Behave exactly as we rehearsed." Emily nodded discreetly, her face a mask of serenity. The designer dress molded perfectly to her body, and the jewels borrowed from Richard sparkled with every movement. Anyone who saw her would never imagine that just 3 months ago, she was a simple domestic worker. As the couple circulated through the ballroom, greeting guests and exchanging pleasantries, curious glances followed them. Everyone wanted to know more about the mysterious woman who had captured the heart of New York's most coveted bachelor. It was then that Richard spotted who he was looking for. Across the room, Elizabeth and Greg had just arrived. His heart raced, a mixture of resentment and anticipation running through his veins. "Come, darling," he said, guiding Emily towards the couple. "There are some people I want you to meet." As they approached, Richard could see the exact moment Elizabeth noticed him. Her eyes widened slightly, and she squeezed Greg's arm, alerting him. "Elizabeth, Greg," Richard greeted, his voice loaded with false cordiality. "What a pleasure to see you here." The silence that followed was palpable, charged with unresolved tension and unspoken words. "Richard," Greg was the first to speak, his voice tense. "We didn't expect to see you." Elizabeth, recovering from the initial surprise, forced a smile. "It's good to see you, Richard. You look well." It was at this moment that Richard felt a subtle change in Emily. She straightened up, her posture emanating a confidence he hadn't noticed before. "Ah, where are my manners?" Richard smiled, turning to Emily. "Allow me to introduce my fiancée, Emily Davis." Elizabeth's eyes widened and Greg choked on his champagne. Emily, in turn, extended her hand gracefully. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Richard has told me so much about you." The way she pronounced these words, the slight tone of irony in her voice, caught Richard by surprise. This wasn't the script they had rehearsed. Elizabeth, quickly recovering, shook Emily's hand. "The pleasure is ours. So, fiancé, that's unexpected. Love catches us by surprise sometimes, doesn't it?" Emily responded, her gaze fixed on Elizabeth, especially when we least expect it. Richard observed the exchange, a mixture of pride and apprehension growing in his chest. Emily was doing better than he could have imagined, but there was something in her performance that intrigued him. It was almost as if his thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of other guests, eager to be introduced to the new sensation of the night. Soon, Emily found herself at the center of attention, charming everyone with her grace and intelligence. As the night progressed, Richard alternated between satisfaction at seeing his plan unfold perfectly and growing unease. Emily wasn't just playing a role, she was dominating the scene. In a moment of relative calm, he pulled her to a discreet corner. "You're doing very well," he praised, maintaining a fixed smile for observers. "But remember, don't overdo it. We don't want to raise suspicions." Emily tilted her head, an enigmatic gleam in her eyes. "Don't worry, Richard. I know exactly what I'm doing." Something in the way she said this sent a shiver down Richard's spine. For the first time since his plan began, he wondered if he had underestimated Emily. Across the room, Elizabeth observed the couple with a mixture of jealousy and distrust. "There's something strange about this story, Greg," she murmured. "Richard was never the type to fall in love quickly. And this woman, there's something about her that doesn't fit." Greg, who had long known Richard's power games, nodded slowly. "Maybe. But whatever he's plotting, it's best we stay out of it." Meanwhile, Emily continued to charm the guests. Her conversation flowed easily from art to literature, from politics to business. At one point, she found herself involved in a heated discussion about the latest financial market trends with a group of executives. Richard, observing from afar, felt a pang of unease. How did she know so much about these subjects? Surely it wasn't something he had included in her training. As the night wore on, curious looks and whispers increased. Everyone wanted to know more about Richard Morgan's mysterious fiancée. Where did she come from? How had they met? And more importantly, how had an unknown woman conquered the heart of New York's most coveted bachelor? In a moment of distraction, Richard found himself alone on one of the hotel's balconies, contemplating the illuminated city below. His thoughts were a whirlwind. The night was going exactly as planned, but something didn't seem right. Emily was shining too brightly, surpassing all his expectations, and that scared him. "A drink for your thoughts?" Emily's soft voice surprised him. She was there, offering him a glass of whiskey, her delicate perfume mingling with the night breeze. Richard accepted the drink, studying Emily's face. Under the soft moonlight, she seemed almost ethereal, a mystery he couldn't decipher. "You surprised me tonight," he admitted, taking a sip. Emily smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's good, isn't it? After all, that was the goal." Richard hesitated. "Yes, but there are things you said, knowledge you demonstrated. I don't remember us rehearsing that." For a brief moment, something passed across Emily's face. A flash of, what? Amusement? Challenge? Before being quickly replaced by her usual expression of sweet innocence. "Oh, Richard," she laughed softly. "You taught me well. Maybe I'm just a good student." Before he could question further, she leaned in and kissed him softly on the lips. It was a calculated gesture, he knew, perfectly visible to anyone watching from the ballroom. But there was something more in that kiss. A promise. Or was it a threat? When they separated, Emily smiled. "Shall we go back? I'm sure there are more people eager to meet the future Mrs. Morgan." As he followed her back to the ballroom, Richard found himself torn between pride in seeing his plan unfold so perfectly and a growing sense that he was losing control of the situation. What he didn't know was that while he thought he was moving the pieces of his elaborate game, it was he who was being subtly manipulated. Emily Davis had her own plans, and the night was far from over. As the party approached its peak, glances and whispers intensified. Richard Morgan and his mysterious fiancée had become the center of attention, exactly as he had planned. But as he watched Emily circulate through the ballroom, charming magnates and socialites with equal ease, a doubt began to gnaw at his confidence. Who was Emily Davis really, and what was she hiding behind that enigmatic smile? The sun had barely risen when Richard awoke, his body tense and his mind restless. The previous night at the Plaza Hotel still echoed in his thoughts, a mixture of triumph and apprehension. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he observed Emily, who was still sleeping peacefully. Silently, Richard got up and went to his office. Closing the door behind him, he picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Anthony, it's Richard. I need you to do a complete investigation on Emily Davis. I want to know everything about her, from the day she was born until last night." On the other end of the line, Anthony, his trusted private investigator, seemed to hesitate. "But, sir, I thought we had already checked her background when you hired her." Richard sighed, running his hand through his hair. "I know, but I want you to go deeper. There's something that doesn't fit." After hanging up, Richard stood there, contemplating the city awakening outside. His plan had seemed perfect: use Emily to make Elizabeth jealous, to show the world he had moved on. But now, an insidious doubt began to erode his confidence. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Emily opened her eyes, perfectly aware of Richard's absence. A slight smile played on her lips as she stretched languidly. The previous night had been a success, but she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Getting up, Emily walked to the window, observing the same view that Richard contemplated from his office. Her eyes, however, didn't just see the buildings and busy streets. They saw opportunities, possibilities, and, above all, a chance for redemption. Hours later, Richard and Emily were seated for breakfast. The silence between them was palpable, loaded with unasked questions and ungiven answers. "You made a great impression last night." Richard finally broke the silence, his eyes studying Emily over his coffee cup. Emily smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. I learned from the best, didn't I?" Richard nodded slowly, pondering his next words. "You know, Emily, I was impressed by your knowledge about everything, especially about finance and art. I don't remember us covering those topics in our rehearsals." For a moment, something passed across Emily's face, a flash of alertness, perhaps, before being quickly replaced by her usual expression of sweet innocence. "Oh, you'd be surprised how much one can learn just by observing and listening, Richard," she responded softly. "Besides, I've always been an avid reader." Before Richard could press further, the phone rang. It was Anthony. "Sir, I found some information you'll want to see." The investigator's voice sounded tense. "Can I come by in an hour?" Richard agreed, hanging up the phone with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Turning to Emily, he forced a smile. "I have some business to take care of this morning. Why don't you take some time to relax? Maybe do some shopping?" Emily nodded, her face a mask of serenity. "Of course, dear. I'll take the opportunity to choose something special for our dinner with your partners tonight." As soon as Emily left, Richard headed to his office, anxious for Anthony's arrival. When the investigator finally arrived, his face was grave. "What did you find out?" Richard asked, barely able to contain his impatience. Anthony placed a folder on the desk. "Emily Davis's story, the one we know, is an elaborate fabrication. She's not an orphan, nor did she grow up in rural Kentucky." Richard felt his stomach sink. "Then who is she?" "Her real name is Emily Thompson," Anthony continued. "Daughter of Edward Thompson, the famous perfumer who passed away a few years ago." Richard paled. Edward Thompson had been a legend in the cosmetics industry, known for his innovative creations and his beauty empire. "But how?" Richard stammered, his mind spinning with the implications of this revelation. Anthony sighed. "Apparently, after her father's death, Emily decided to disappear, changed her name, created a new identity. The reasons are still unclear, but at that moment the office door opened softly. Emily was standing there, her face a mixture of resignation and defiance. "I think it's time we had a talk, Richard," she said, her voice firm. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked from Emily to Anthony, his mind struggling to process the situation. "Leave us, Anthony," he finally managed to say. The investigator nodded, casting a last curious glance at Emily before leaving. As soon as they were alone, Emily walked calmly to the window, her back turned to Richard. "I imagine you have many questions," she began. Richard stood up, his anger growing. "Questions? You lied to me, all of this. Was it all a farce?" Emily turned, her eyes meeting his. "No more than your plan to use me as a pawn in your petty revenge, Richard." He froze, the words hitting him like a slap. How, how do you know about that? A sad smile played on Emily's lips. You're not the only one capable of doing investigations, my dear. I knew exactly who you were and what you intended from the first day. Richard staggered, sitting heavily in his chair. But why? Why subject yourself to this? Emily approached, her eyes shining with a mixture of determination and sadness. Because I had my own reasons, Richard, reasons that go far beyond simple revenge. She paused, as if pondering how much to reveal. My father, he didn't just pass away, he was ruined, and the man responsible for that, well, let's say he has a very close connection to you. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. Greg, he whispered, the pieces starting to fit together. Emily nodded slowly. Exactly. When I learned of your plan, I saw an opportunity. A chance to get close, to uncover the truth, and perhaps to do justice. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with revelations and long-held secrets. Richard looked at Emily, seeing her for the first time not as a piece in his game, but as an equal, a formidable adversary. And now? He finally asked, his voice low. Emily leaned in, her eyes fixed on his. Now, Richard, we have a choice to make. We can continue with this farce, each pursuing our own objectives in secret. Or, Richard pressed, feeling he was on the verge of something monumental. Or we can join forces, Emily concluded, a determined gleam in her eyes. Imagine what we could accomplish together, with our combined resources and a common goal. Richard stared at her, his mind racing with the possibilities. Emily's proposal was tempting, offering not just a chance for revenge, but also an opportunity for redemption. As the afternoon sun bathed the office in golden hues, Richard Morgan and Emily Thompson found themselves at a turning point. The masks had fallen, the secrets revealed. What would come next depended entirely on the choice they would make at that moment. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The silence in Richard's office was palpable, charged with tension and possibilities. Emily remained standing, her gaze fixed on the man who, until moments ago, believed he was in control of everything. Richard, in turn, felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. All his life he had been the master of the game, always 2 steps ahead of everyone. Now, for the first time, he found himself in unknown territory. An alliance? He finally broke the silence, his voice a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. How can I trust you after all this? Emily smiled, a gesture that was neither condescending nor provocative, but understanding. The same way I can trust you, Richard. Neither of us has that luxury. But we have something more valuable, a common interest. Slowly she approached the desk, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the polished wood. Think about it. You want revenge against Elizabeth and Greg. I want justice for what happened to my father. Our goals align perfectly. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Emily with new eyes. He no longer saw her as the naive maid he thought he could manipulate, but as an equal, a worthy adversary who could become a powerful ally. Suppose I agree, he said slowly. How would we proceed? Emily's eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and determination. First, we need to fully understand what happened. The fall of my father's empire wasn't a simple market mishap. There was something more, something Greg orchestrated behind the scenes. Richard nodded, his mind already working on the possibilities. I always knew Greg had his secrets, but I never imagined they were so deep. Exactly, Emily agreed. And that's where your position and your contacts become invaluable. You have access to information and people that I, alone, could never reach. For a moment, Richard was silent, pondering. Then slowly a smile began to form on his lips. You know, Emily, I think I underestimated you. And I must admit I'm impressed. Emily inclined her head in a slight acknowledgement. Believe me, the feeling is mutual. Your original plan was brilliant, even if a bit conventional. Richard couldn't help but laugh. Conventional. Ouch. I guess I deserved that. The mood in the office subtly changed. The previous tension gave way to something new, mutual respect and perhaps the beginning of a true partnership. So, Richard leaned forward, his eyes shining with a new determination. Where do we start? Emily smiled, a gesture that now seemed genuine. First, we keep up appearances. To the outside world, we continue to be the loving couple everyone saw last night. That will give us the perfect cover for our investigations." Richard nodded, impressed with the quickness and clarity of Emily's thinking. "And meanwhile," Emily continued, "we start digging. We need to find out exactly how Greg manipulated the fall of the Thompson Empire. And more importantly, we need to understand why." The following hours flew by as Richard and Emily made plans, shared information, and began to weave a web of investigation that promised to shake the foundations of New York's high society. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, Richard found himself looking at Emily with a new perspective. She wasn't just intelligent and astute, but also passionate and determined. A dangerous combination, and he had to admit, extremely attractive. "You know," he said, breaking a moment of contemplative silence, "I think we should celebrate our new partnership." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Richard smiled, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "How about dinner? Not at a fancy restaurant or a high society party, something more authentic." Emily seemed surprised, but pleasantly so. "I'm intrigued. Lead the way, partner." Hours later, Richard and Emily found themselves in a small restaurant in Chinatown, surrounded by the cheerful hustle and bustle of families and the tempting aroma of authentic Chinese food. Seated at a discreet table in the back, they looked like an ordinary couple enjoying a simple meal, but the glances they exchanged and the intensity of their whispered conversation told a different story. "I never imagined you frequented places like this," Emily commented, savoring a piece of dim sum. Richard shrugged, a relaxed smile on his face. "There are many things about me that you still don't know, Emily Thompson." "Fair enough," she laughed softly. "I guess we both have our surprises." As the night progressed, their conversation flowed naturally from business strategies to personal stories, from revenge plans to long-forgotten dreams. For the first time since they met, the masks fell completely, revealing not just strategic allies but two complex and wounded souls, seeking redemption and justice. In a moment of pause, Richard found himself studying Emily's face, noticing the way her eyes sparkled in the candlelight, the soft curve of her lips when she smiled. He felt something change within him, an emotion he couldn't name, but that both scared and excited him at the same time. Emily, in turn, observed Richard with a new appreciation. Beneath the facade of the ruthless businessman, she glimpsed a man of depth and passion, someone who, like her, had been deeply hurt by the world around them. When they finally left the restaurant, walking side by side through the illuminated streets of Chinatown, both felt that something fundamental had changed. What had begun as a game of deception and manipulation had transformed into something deeper, more genuine. Back at Richard's apartment, standing in front of the door of the bedroom they now shared as part of their elaborate ruse, they hesitated. "Good night, Richard," Emily said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Good night, Emily," he responded, his voice equally low. For a moment they stood there, suspended between what they were and what they could become. Then, with a final glance loaded with unspoken promises, each retreated to their side of the bed, their minds full of plans for the future and hearts beating with unexplored possibilities. The game had changed once again, and the stakes were now higher than either of them could have imagined. But for the first time, both Richard and Emily felt they were no longer playing alone, and that, they realized, made all the difference. Dawn found Richard and Emily already awake, their minds buzzing with plans and strategies. Breakfast, served on the spacious balcony of the apartment, became an improvised strategy meeting. "We need to start with Greg Enterprises," Emily said, spreading some documents on the table. "If my hunches are correct, that's where it all began." Richard nodded, his eyes quickly scanning the papers. "I agree, but getting in there won't be easy. Greg has always been paranoid about security, especially after we parted ways." A momentary silence hung between them, the weight of the past still present. Emily broke it, her voice soft but determined. "That's where our disguise comes in. The loving couple, newly engaged. No one would suspect us participating in corporate events, mixing business with pleasure." A slow smile formed on Richard's lips. "Brilliant. And with the launch of Greg Enterprises' new cosmetics line next week, we'll have our entry," Emily concluded, her eyes shining with anticipation. The days that followed were a frenzied mix of preparations and discreet investigations. While maintaining appearances in public, romantic dinners, hand-in-hand walks through Central Park, behind the scenes, they worked tirelessly. Emily delved into her vast network of contacts in the cosmetics industry, gathering information about Gregg Enterprises' recent movements. Richard in turn used his influence to obtain financial documents and internal reports that, at first glance, seemed harmless, but under closer scrutiny revealed intriguing discrepancies. On the night of the big launch event, the lobby of the luxurious Astoria Hotel glittered with the lights of camera flashes and the clinking of champagne flutes. Richard and Emily made their entrance, the embodiment of elegance and young love. "Remember," Richard whispered, his lips close to Emily's ear, in a gesture that to observers seemed like an affectionate caress. "Our goal is Gregg's office on the 30th floor." Emily smiled, leaning into him in a display of affection. "Leave it to me. I have a plan." As they circulated through the hall, greeting acquaintances and exchanging pleasantries, Emily subtly guided Richard towards a group where Gregg was at the center, surrounded by admirers and potential investors. "Gregg!" Emily exclaimed, her voice a perfect mixture of surprise and joy. "What a pleasure to see you again." Gregg turned, his face showing a brief expression of shock before composing himself. "Emily, Richard, what a pleasant surprise." The discomfort was palpable, but Emily, in her role, seemed oblivious to it. "Oh, Gregg, you must tell us all about this new line. Richard and I are absolutely fascinated, aren't we, darling?" Richard, following the cue, nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. In fact, we were thinking about possible collaborations. You know, joining forces." Gregg's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of suspicion and interest shining in them. "Collaborations? That's intriguing. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting." "What a wonderful idea," Emily exclaimed, her enthusiasm seemingly genuine. Minutes later, the three found themselves in the elevator, ascending to Gregg's private office on the 30th floor. The silence was tense, loaded with untold stories and past betrayals. Once in the office, Gregg headed to the bar. "A drink?" "Please," Richard replied, his eyes discreetly scanning the room, memorizing details. Emily, in turn, moved gracefully through the space, her fingers sliding over books and art objects. "What a fascinating office, Gregg. So revealing." Gregg turned, glasses in hand, his expression cautious. "Revealing? How so?" Emily smiled, taking one of the glasses. "Oh, you know. The art we choose, the books we read. They say so much about us, don't you think?" The conversation that followed was an elaborate dance of unspoken words and hidden intentions. While Gregg talked about possible collaborations and market expansions, Richard and Emily exchanged significant glances, each playing their part to perfection. In a moment of distraction from Gregg, Emily accidentally spilled her glass, the liquid spreading across the Persian rug. "Oh, heavens!" she exclaimed, genuinely mortified. "What a disaster! Gregg, I'm so sorry. Where can I find something to clean this up?" Gregg, visibly irritated but maintaining his composure, pointed to a side door. "There, in the adjoining bathroom. There should be towels." While Emily hurried to the bathroom and Gregg called an employee to help with the cleaning, Richard took advantage of the moment of confusion to discreetly insert a small USB device into one of the office computers. Minutes later, with the rug cleaned and apologies made, the trio returned to the party. But something had changed. The air was charged with tension, and secrets about to be revealed. Back at the apartment in the early hours of the morning, Richard and Emily pored over the content extracted from Gregg's computer. "My God," Emily whispered, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the documents. This is worse than we imagined." Richard nodded gravely. "Fraud, market manipulation, bribery. Gregg didn't just ruin your father, Emily. He built an empire on the ruins of dozens of other companies." A heavy silence fell over them, the weight of the discovery hanging in the air. Emily abruptly stood up, walking to the window. Her back was tense, her fists clenched. "Emily?" Richard called softly, approaching. When she turned, there were tears in her eyes, but also a fierce determination. "We're going to bring him down, Richard. Not just for my father, but for everyone he destroyed." Richard took her hands in his, his touch surprisingly gentle. "We'll do this together. I promise." At that moment, looking into each other's eyes, both felt something change. What had begun as an alliance of convenience, a partnership based on revenge and justice, was transforming into something deeper, more genuine. As the sun began to rise on the New York horizon, Richard and Emily remained there, hand in hand, united not only by their desire for justice, but by a bond that neither had foreseen or sought. The game had changed once again, and this time, the stakes were their own hearts. The days that followed the discovery of Greg's illicit activities were a roller coaster of emotions and frantic actions. Richard and Emily dove headfirst into the task of unraveling each layer of corruption and fraud, working tirelessly to build a solid case against the man who had caused so much harm. However, as they spent more time together, something unexpected began to happen. Furtive glances became more frequent. Casual touches seemed to linger a little longer than necessary, and nightly conversations extended into the early hours, far beyond discussions of strategies and evidence. One night, while reviewing documents in Richard's living room, Emily let out a frustrated sigh, throwing a folder onto the coffee table. "This is impossible," she exclaimed, running her hands through her hair. "Every time we think we have everything, Greg seems to be 2 steps ahead." Richard looked at her, noticing the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. Without thinking, he moved behind her and began to gently massage her shoulders. "Hey," he said softly, "we'll get there. We're close. I can feel it." Emily closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax under Richard's touch. "It's just that sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. All this effort, all this anger." Richard stopped the massage, turning Emily's chair so she faced him. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. "It's worth it," he said firmly, "not just for justice, but because it brought me to you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Emily felt her heart race, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her body. "Richard," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, "what are we doing?" He leaned in closer, their faces inches apart. "I think we're discovering that not everything in this life is about revenge or justice. Sometimes it's about finding something we didn't even know we were looking for." The kiss that followed was soft, hesitant at first, but quickly transformed into something deeper, more urgent. Years of loneliness, distrust, and pain seemed to dissipate in that moment of connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Emily rested her forehead against Richard's. "This complicates things, doesn't it?" Richard chuckled softly. "I think our lives were complicated enough already. Maybe this is exactly what we needed to simplify everything." In the days that followed, Richard and Emily found themselves navigating uncharted waters. On one hand, they continued their relentless mission to expose Greg and seek justice. On the other, they were discovering a new dimension to their relationship, one that went far beyond their professional partnership or their elaborate ruse. Paradoxically, this new connection between them seemed to make them even more effective in their investigation. They worked in perfect sync, anticipating each other's thoughts, complementing each other's skills. It was during one of these intense work sessions that Emily made a crucial discovery. "Richard," she called, her voice trembling with excitement, "I think I found something." He rushed to her side, leaning over her shoulder to look at the computer screen. "What is it?" Emily pointed to a series of seemingly innocuous financial transactions. "Look at this. These transfers, they seem normal at first glance, but if you look closely..." Richard frowned, studying the numbers. Then his eyes widened in understanding. "My God, it's a pattern. He was laundering money through shell companies." Emily nodded, a gleam of triumph in her eyes. "And that's not all. Look at the dates. They coincide exactly with the periods when several companies, including my father's, started facing difficulties." Richard straightened up, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of disbelief. This is what we needed. With this, we can not only expose Greg, but also restore your father's reputation." Emily abruptly stood up, throwing her arms around Richard's neck. Tears of relief and joy ran down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." Richard hugged her back, feeling the warmth of her body against his. At that moment, all the lies, all the games and manipulations seemed so distant. What remained was only the truth of their feelings for each other. When they pulled apart slightly, their gazes met again. This time, there was no hesitation. The kiss they shared was a celebration, a promise and a new beginning. Later, lying side by side in Richard's bed, their hands intertwined, they contemplated the future. "What do we do now?" Emily asked softly. Richard turned his head to look at her, a gentle smile on his lips. "Now? Now we bring justice, and then we start our own story. No lies, no games. Just us." Emily smiled back, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "I like that," she murmured. As they drifted off to sleep, the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains. A new day was dawning, not just literally, but also for Richard and Emily. A day of truth, justice, and above all, love. The game they had begun as adversaries and continued as allies was coming to an end. But their story, their true story, was just beginning. Dawn brought with it a new energy for Richard and Emily. With the crucial evidence in hand and their mutual feelings finally acknowledged, they felt invincible. However, both knew that the path ahead would be challenging. "We need to be careful," Richard said as they had breakfast on the balcony. "Greg has powerful connections. If he suspects we're about to expose him, he might try to get ahead of us." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I agree. We need a foolproof plan." In the weeks that followed, Richard and Emily worked tirelessly, refining their strategy. They decided to approach the situation on multiple fronts: legal, media, and social. On the legal front, they discreetly hired a team of lawyers specializing in financial crimes. With the meticulously organized evidence, they began to prepare a solid case against Greg and his accomplices. On the media front, Emily used her contacts in the cosmetics industry to plant seeds of doubt about Greg Enterprises' practices. Subtle rumors began to circulate, questioning the origin of the company's meteoric success. Socially, Richard and Emily intensified their presence at high society events. Their seemingly perfect love story made them the center of attention, allowing them to gather even more information through casual conversations with other members of the business elite. Meanwhile, their personal relationship blossomed. The nights were filled with deep conversations, laughter, and a connection that both felt they had waited a lifetime to find. One evening, as they shared a bottle of wine on Richard's penthouse balcony, Emily suddenly turned serious. "Richard," she began, her voice soft, what if all of this goes wrong? What if we can't bring Greg down?" Richard put his glass aside and took her hands in his. "Then we'll start over, together. No matter what happens with Greg, what we found in each other, this is real. It's ours." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Who would have thought that in the midst of all this chaos, we'd find something so precious? They kissed under the starry New York sky, the future uncertain, but full of promises. The next day, while reviewing some documents, Richard's phone rang. It was Anthony, his private investigator. "Sir," Anthony's voice sounded urgent, "we have a problem. It seems Greg is planning to leave the country. He's booked a private jet for tomorrow night." Richard and Emily exchanged alarmed looks. Their time was running out. "We need to act now," Emily said, her voice firm. "We can't let him escape." Richard nodded, his mind already working on the possibilities. "I'll call our lawyers. We need a search and seizure warrant immediately." The following hours were a race against time. While Richard coordinated with the legal team, Emily mobilized her media contacts. If they were going to expose Greg, they would do it in a grand manner. As night fell, everything was prepared. The lawyers had secured the warrant and a team of police officers was on standby. Reporters from various news outlets had been discreetly alerted to a big story about to break. Richard and Emily were in the car, on their way to Greg Enterprises headquarters, when Richard suddenly took Emily's hand. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I want you to know that I love you, I truly love you." Emily felt her heart leap. It was the first time these words had been spoken between them. "I love you too, Richard, more than I ever thought possible." They kissed briefly, before composing themselves. The moment of truth had arrived. When they arrived at Greg Enterprises, The building was lit up and bustling despite the late hour. Clearly, Greg was making final preparations for his escape. Richard and Emily led the group that entered the building, accompanied by police officers and lawyers. The element of surprise was on their side. When they reached the executive floor, they found Greg in his office, surrounded by suitcases and scattered documents. "It's over, Greg," Richard announced, his voice firm. Greg turned, the shock on his face quickly giving way to cold anger. "Richard and Emily, what an unpleasant surprise." Emily stepped forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and sadness. "We know everything, Greg. The frauds, the money laundering, how you destroyed companies to build your empire, including my father's company." For a moment, Greg seemed deflated. Then a bitter smile formed on his lips. "Bravo. You two make quite a pair. Who would have thought that my revenge against Richard would end up destroying me?" As the police approached to make the arrest, Greg looked directly at Richard. "You may have won this battle, old friend, but don't think it's the end." Richard watched in silence as Greg was led away. Beside him, Emily intertwined her fingers with his, offering silent support. Outside, camera flashes exploded, and reporters shouted questions. The story of the fall of one of New York's greatest businessmen was about to dominate the headlines. But for Richard and Emily, standing there in the midst of the chaos, there was only one truth that mattered. They had found each other, and together they were ready to face any challenge the future might bring. As they left the building, hand in hand, they knew that a chapter of their lives had closed, but another, even more exciting one, was just beginning. In the weeks following Greg's arrest, New York was engulfed in a media storm. Newspapers, magazines, and television programs talked of nothing else. Greg's empire crumbled before the public's eyes, revealing layer upon layer of corruption and fraud. Richard and Emily, although at the center of this hurricane, remained discreet. They knew their battle was far from over. There was still much work to be done to restore the companies Greg had destroyed, including Emily's father's legacy. One morning, while having coffee on the balcony of Richard's apartment, which was now home to both of them, Emily was leafing through the day's newspaper. "Look at this," she said, showing Richard the headline. "3 more Greg Enterprises executives were arrested yesterday." Richard nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "The web is unraveling, but we still have a long way to go." Emily put the newspaper aside and took Richard's hand. "I've been thinking, what if we used all this knowledge we've gained for something bigger?" Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "A new company," Emily said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "One that combines my knowledge in cosmetics with your business expertise. But this time we'll do everything ethically, transparently. We can be an example of how it's possible to succeed without compromising integrity." Richard felt a smile form on his lips. The idea was audacious, but he expected nothing less from Emily. "You know what? I think it's a brilliant idea." In the months that followed, Richard and Emily worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They rented a space in a commercial building in the heart of New York City and began assembling their team. Emily led the development of an innovative line of cosmetics focused on natural and sustainable ingredients. She drew inspiration from her family's old recipes, combining them with the latest scientific discoveries. Richard, in turn, structured the business side. He implemented radical transparency policies, making public all of the company's processes, from the origin of ingredients to financial details. The new company, which they named Rebirth Cosmetics, quickly gained attention. The story behind its creation, combined with the exceptional quality of the products and impeccable business ethics, resonated with an increasingly conscious public. 1 year after Greg's downfall, Richard and Emily were standing on the stage of a large auditorium, ready to officially launch Rebirth Cosmetics to the world. Emily, radiant in an emerald green dress, addressed the audience full of journalists, influencers, and potential investors. "A year ago, we were in a very different place," she began, motivated by pain and the desire for justice. "But throughout this journey, we discovered something much more valuable, the possibility of creating something truly good." Richard continued, "Rebirth is not just a cosmetics company. It's a commitment to ethics, to transparency, and to the idea that it's possible to succeed by doing the right thing." The launch was a resounding success. The products sold out within hours, and social media exploded with praise for the initiative. That night, after the excitement of the event had passed, Richard and Emily were once again on the apartment balcony, this time toasting with champagne. "To Rebirth's success," Richard proposed a toast. "To us," Emily added, her eyes shining with love and pride. As their glasses clinked, both felt the weight of the moment. They had transformed a story of revenge and pain into something beautiful and meaningful. "You know," Richard said, pulling Emily close, "I think I finally understood the true meaning of success." "And what is it?" Emily asked, nestling in his arms. "It's this," he replied, looking at the illuminated city below them. "It's creating something that makes a difference. It's finding someone to share it all with. It's transforming the negative into positive." Emily smiled, feeling tears of happiness form in her eyes. Who would have thought our story of revenge would turn into a story of love and redemption? They kissed under the starry New York sky, knowing they had not only defeated their enemies, but also their own inner demons. Rebirth Cosmetics was just beginning its journey, but Richard and Emily knew that together they could face any challenge the future might bring. They had been reborn, just like their company, and the future had never looked so bright. As the night progressed, they made plans for the future, not just for the company, but for themselves. They talked about marriage, about family, about all the possibilities that now opened up before them. The path that brought them here was twisted and often painful, but each step led them exactly where they were meant to be, in each other's arms, ready to write the next chapter of their lives, together. The initial success of Rebirth Cosmetics was just the beginning of a journey filled with challenges and opportunities. As the company grew, Richard and Emily found themselves navigating increasingly complex waters of the corporate world. One day, during a meeting with the product development team, Emily presented a revolutionary idea. "What if we create a makeup line that not only beautifies but also cares for the skin?" she proposed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We could incorporate active ingredients that treat specific skin problems while providing coverage." The team was excited about the proposal, but Richard, ever the pragmatist, raised an important question. "The idea is brilliant, love," he said, "but developing such a line would require significant investment in research and technology. Are we prepared for that?" It was at this moment that Emily and Richard realized they were at a crucial point. They could play it safe, maintaining the company's current course, or they could take a risk, investing heavily in innovation. After days of heated discussions and nights of reflection, they decided to move forward with the audacious project. It was risky, but both felt it was the natural next step for Rebirth. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. The research and development team worked tirelessly, facing numerous obstacles and setbacks. There were moments when the project seemed to be on the brink of failure. One particularly difficult night, after receiving news of yet another failed test, Richard found Emily on the apartment balcony, silent tears running down her face. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered as he embraced her. "What if this is too much?" Richard gently lifted her face to look into her eyes. "Remember when we started all this? We faced Greg, exposed a corrupt empire. If we could do that, we can do anything." Richard's words reignited Emily's determination. Together they renewed their commitment to Rebirth's vision. Finally, after almost a year of development, they succeeded. The new makeup line, dubbed Metamorphosis, not only met expectations but exceeded them. Clinical tests showed impressive results in improving skin health, in addition to offering flawless coverage. The launch of the Metamorphosis line was a resounding success. Beauty critics, dermatologists, and consumers were amazed by the products. Sales soared, surpassing all projections. With success came a new wave of challenges. The demand for products was so high that production could barely keep up. Richard and Emily found themselves working day and night to expand production capacity without compromising quality or the company's ethical principles. In the midst of all this whirlwind, they still found time to nurture their relationship. Work nights often ended with improvised romantic dinners in the office or long hand-in-hand walks through the streets of New York, discussing their dreams for the future. It was during one of these walks that Richard surprised Emily with an unexpected request. Stopping in front of a small park where they had shared many moments together, Richard knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emily Thompson," he began, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You've transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. We've weathered storms together and built something beautiful out of chaos. You make me want to be a better person every day. Will you marry me?" With tears in her eyes, Emily pulled Richard up and kissed him passionately. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. Richard and Emily's engagement became the talk of New York. The story of the couple who had brought down a corrupt empire and built an ethical company in its place captured the public's imagination. As they planned their wedding, Richard and Emily also charted Rebirth's future. They were determined to expand internationally, taking their message of ethical beauty to the world. One afternoon, while discussing expansion plans, Emily suddenly turned serious. "Richard," she said, "there's something I've been thinking about. With all our success, we have a unique platform. What if we used it to do even more good?" Richard tilted his head, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "A foundation," Emily explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We could use a portion of our profits to support important causes. Education for girls in underprivileged communities, research on skin diseases, ethical entrepreneurship programs." Richard smiled, once again marveling at his fiancée's vision and heart. "It's a brilliant idea. Let's make it happen." Thus was born the Rebirth Foundation, another step in Richard and Emily's journey to create a positive impact in the world. As they prepared for their wedding and for the next chapter of their lives, both personally and professionally, Richard and Emily reflected on the incredible journey that brought them here. What began as a quest for revenge had transformed into a story of love, redemption, and purpose. They knew the path ahead would still have its challenges, but they were ready to face them together, with the same passion and determination that united them. The future had never looked brighter for Richard and Emily, and for Rebirth Cosmetics. They were ready to transform not just the beauty industry, but the world around them, one product, one life at a time. The big day finally arrived. St. Patrick's Cathedral in the heart of New York City was decorated with white and gold flowers, reflecting the elegance and love of the couple. Richard waited anxiously at the altar, his heart beating strongly with emotion. When the doors opened and Emily entered, radiant in her wedding dress, a collective gasp went through the church. She walked down the aisle with grace and determination, her eyes fixed on Richard. At that moment, both felt that all the path they had traveled, the struggles, the pain, the victories, had led them exactly to this point. After the moving ceremony, the reception was a celebration not just of Richard and Emily's love, but of everything they had achieved. Friends, family, and even business partners gathered to honor the couple who had transformed a story of revenge into a legacy of love and ethical business practices. But not even the honeymoon on the idyllic Greek islands could completely keep Richard and Emily's thoughts away from their ambitious plans for Rebirth Cosmetics. Upon their return, they dove headfirst into preparations for the company's international expansion. The plan was audacious, to open flagship stores in London, Paris, and Tokyo simultaneously. "It's risky," warned James, the company's new CFO, during a board meeting. "International expansion requires massive investment, and foreign markets are unpredictable." Emily, however, was confident. "Our products have a universal message. Ethical beauty, sustainability, transparency. These values resonate around the world." Richard supported his wife's vision, but also recognized the risks. "We'll move forward, but with caution. We'll conduct extensive market research and adapt our strategy for each region." The following months were a rush of preparations. Teams were sent to each city to oversee the opening of the stores. Marketing campaigns were meticulously planned, and international supply logistics were established. In the midst of all this whirlwind, Emily discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a wave of joy to the couple, but also increased the pressure. They weren't just building a business empire now. They were creating a legacy for their child. The simultaneous opening of the international stores was a spectacle. In London, beauty critics praised the innovation of the products. In Paris, celebrities walked the red carpet. In Tokyo, lines formed around the block. The initial success was dizzying. Sales exceeded all expectations, and Rebirth Cosmetics quickly became an internationally recognized name. But with growth came new challenges. The growing demand put pressure on the supply chain. Maintaining ethical and quality standards on a global scale proved to be more difficult than anticipated. One afternoon, Richard received an alarming call. A batch of products sent to the London store had quality issues. Customers reported allergic reactions. "How could this happen?" Emily asked, horrified when Richard shared the news. "Our quality control protocols are rigorous." A quick investigation revealed that an ingredient supplier had altered their formula without notifying Rebirth. The incident, although isolated, threatened to tarnish the company's impeccable reputation. Richard and Emily went into crisis management mode. They immediately recalled the problematic batch from the market, offered generous compensation to affected customers, and launched a transparency campaign detailing exactly what had happened and how they were resolving the problem. "This is the moment to show the world that our ethics are not just a marketing slogan," Richard said during an emergency meeting with the team. "It's who we are, even, and especially, when things go wrong." The way Rebirth handled the crisis ended up strengthening its reputation. Customers and industry analysts praised the company's transparency and quick response. As they navigated these turbulent waters, Emily entered the third trimester of her pregnancy. The stress of international expansion and the recent crisis weighed on her, and Richard was increasingly concerned. One night, he found Emily working late in her home office. "Love," he said softly, "we need to talk." Emily looked up, exhausted but determined. "Just a few more emails, dear. I need to ensure that the new marketing campaign adequately reflects our changes in quality control protocols." Richard knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her belly. "Emily, you need to slow down. It's not healthy for you or the baby." For a moment, Emily wanted to protest, but then she felt a movement inside her, their child moving, as if agreeing with his father. Tears began to form in her eyes. "You're right," she whispered. "It's just that we've worked so hard for all of this. I feel like I can't stop now." Richard hugged her tenderly. "We're not stopping, we're adapting. Rebirth is strong, our team is competent. We can take a step back and trust them." That night, Richard and Emily made an important decision. They would reduce their workloads, delegate more responsibilities, and focus on preparing for their child's arrival. As they approached the end of the year, Rebirth Cosmetics had overcome the crisis and was stronger than ever. The international expansion was a success. The Rebirth Foundation was making a significant impact in communities around the world, and Richard and Emily were about to embark on their greatest adventure yet: parenthood. Sitting on the balcony of their apartment on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks illuminate the New York sky, Richard and Emily reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that we'd be here now," Emily said, caressing her belly, "I would never have believed it." Richard smiled, pulling her closer. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? We started with a plan for revenge and ended up with love, success, and a baby on the way." As the clock approached midnight, they made a silent toast. To the year that was ending, with all its challenges and triumphs. To the year that was coming, full of promises and new adventures. And to the love that had brought them here and would continue to guide them into the future. The future was bright for Richard, Emily, and Rebirth Cosmetics. They had proven that it was possible to succeed in business without compromising ethics, and that even from the most unlikely circumstances, true love can flourish. As fireworks exploded in the sky, marking the beginning of a new year, Richard and Emily sealed the moment with a kiss, ready for the next chapter of their extraordinary journey together. The cry of a baby echoed through the apartment, breaking the silence of the early morning. Richard, with sleepy eyes but a smile on his face, got up to attend to his newborn son, Alexander. "Shh, it's okay, Daddy's here," he murmured softly, picking up the baby. Emily appeared in the doorway of the room, her face a mixture of exhaustion and infinite love. "Let me feed him," she said, extending her arms. As Emily nursed Alexander, Richard observed his small family with a sense of wonder and gratitude. Alexander's arrival 3 months ago had transformed their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The first months of parenthood were an emotional roller coaster of challenges. Sleepless nights mingled with moments of pure joy. Richard and Emily were learning to balance the demands of being parents with the responsibilities of running a growing multinational company. Rebirth Cosmetics continued to thrive under the leadership of the executive team they had carefully assembled. The decision to delegate more responsibilities proved wise, allowing Richard and Emily to focus on their new role as parents while still maintaining a strategic vision for the company. One morning, while having breakfast with Alexander sleeping peacefully in his nearby crib, Emily shared an idea she had been cultivating. "Richard, I've been thinking," she began, a familiar gleam of enthusiasm in her eyes. "What if we launched a line of baby products?" Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Baby products? That's a significant departure from our current line." Emily nodded, her excitement growing as she explained, "Yes, but think about it. Since Alexander was born, I've become much more aware of what we put on his skin. There's a growing demand for baby products that are truly natural and ethical." Richard pondered the idea, a smile slowly forming on his face. "You know what? I think you might be onto something here. We could apply all our experience in natural ingredients and ethical processes to create a revolutionary line of baby care products." In the months that followed, between diaper changes and board meetings, Richard and Emily worked on developing the new product line. They wanted to create something that not only met the highest standards of quality and safety, but also incorporated Rebirth's core values. The research and development team worked tirelessly, testing formulas and ingredients. Each product was meticulously designed to be gentle on babies' sensitive skin, while also being environmentally responsible. Meanwhile, the Rebirth Foundation expanded its focus to include initiatives aimed at child health and well-being. They launched education programs about baby care in underprivileged communities and began funding research on rare childhood diseases. The launch of the Rebirth baby line was an instant success. Parents worldwide embraced the idea of baby products that were not only safe and effective, but also aligned with ethical and sustainable values. One afternoon, while playing with Alexander on the living room floor, surrounded by packaging prototypes and product samples, Richard looked at Emily with admiration. "You know," he said, "sometimes I'm still surprised at how far we've come. From a revenge plan to this, a family, a company that's making a difference in the world." Emily smiled, taking Richard's hand. "It's amazing, isn't it? And to think it all started with lies and deception. Who would have thought we'd find the deepest truth of our lives through that?" Alexander let out a laugh, as if understanding the irony of the situation, making his parents laugh along with him. As Rebirth Cosmetics continued to grow and evolve, Richard and Emily found themselves facing new challenges. The expansion into the baby product line opened new doors, but also brought even greater scrutiny. The responsibility of creating products for the most vulnerable was not something they took lightly. One day, during a meeting with the marketing team, a heated discussion arose about how to promote the new line. "We should use celebrities," argued one of the executives. "That would give instant visibility to the brand." Emily frowned, not entirely convinced. "I don't know, doesn't that seem a bit artificial for what we're trying to achieve?" Richard, who had been listening attentively, finally spoke. "What if, instead of celebrities, we used real stories? Ordinary parents, sharing their authentic experiences with our products." The idea resonated with everyone in the room. It was perfectly aligned with Rebirth's values of authenticity and transparency. As they implemented this new marketing strategy, Richard and Emily continued to navigate the challenges of parenthood and managing a global company. There were difficult days, of course, sleepless nights followed by crucial business meetings, moments of doubt and extreme fatigue. But there were also moments of pure joy and fulfillment. Seeing Alexander grow and develop, witnessing the positive impact their products and foundation were having on the world, all of this served as a constant reminder of why they did what they did. One night after putting Alexander to bed, Richard and Emily were on the balcony, looking out at the city that never sleeps. "Sometimes I wonder," Emily said softly, "what would have happened if we had gone through with the original plan? If we had really used each other just for revenge?" Richard pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "I think the universe had bigger plans for us. Sometimes you have to go through fire to find gold." Emily smiled, snuggling closer to him. "Well, I'm glad we found our gold," As the night wore on, they remained there, embracing, contemplating the future. Rebirth Cosmetics was flourishing, their family was growing, and the impact they were having on the world was greater than they had ever dreamed. The path ahead would still have its challenges, of that they were certain. But Richard and Emily knew that, together, they could face anything. They had transformed a story of revenge into a tale of love, redemption, and purpose. And as the lights of New York shimmered in the distance, Richard and Emily silently renewed their commitment to each other and to the vision they had created together. The future was bright, full of possibilities, and they could hardly wait to see what the next chapter would bring. 5 years had passed since the launch of the Rebirth baby line. Rebirth Cosmetics was no longer just a company. It had become a global movement, a symbol of ethics, sustainability, and innovation in the business world. Richard and Emily, now 40 and 30 years old respectively, were sitting in their home office, preparing for an interview with an important business magazine. Alexander, now 5 years old, played quietly in the corner, absorbed in his world of building blocks. "Nervous?" Richard asked, adjusting the computer camera. Emily smiled, shaking her head. "Not at all. After everything we've been through, an interview is a piece of cake." The journalist appeared on the screen, smiling warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, it's a great pleasure to have you here. The story of Rebirth Cosmetics is truly inspiring. Can you tell us a bit about how it all started?" Richard and Emily exchanged a knowing look before Richard began. "Well, the truth is that Rebirth was born from an unexpected place. What started as, well, let's say, a plan to settle old scores transformed into something much bigger and more meaningful than we could have ever imagined." Emily continued, "We discovered that we had much more in common than we initially thought. We shared a vision of a world where business could be conducted with ethics and transparency, where success wouldn't come at the expense of the planet or people." The journalist nodded, fascinated. "And how did you transform that vision into reality?" "It was a process," Richard explained. "Each challenge we faced, each obstacle we overcame, helped us refine our mission and our values. The international expansion, the launch of the baby line, the creation of the Rebirth Foundation, each step taught us something new." Emily added, "And, of course, becoming parents was a big part of that. Alexander gave us a new perspective, a renewed sense of responsibility for the future." As if knowing they were talking about him, Alexander looked up and smiled, waving at the camera. The journalist smiled back before asking her next question. "You've faced many challenges along the way. Which would you say was the most difficult?" Richard and Emily exchanged another look before Emily answered, "I think the most difficult challenge was internal. It was the journey of transforming our mindset from one focused on revenge to one focused on creating something truly positive. That required a lot of self-reflection and personal growth." Richard nodded in agreement. "Additionally, maintaining our integrity as we grew was a constant challenge. Every decision we made had to align with our values, even when the easier path was tempting." The interview continued, covering topics from Rebirth's technological innovations to the global impact of the foundation. When it came to an end, the journalist asked one last question. "What do you see for the future of Rebirth Cosmetics?" Emily smiled, looking first at Richard and then at Alexander. "The future is bright. We'll continue to innovate, to expand our positive impact. But more importantly, we'll continue to build a legacy that our son can be proud of." Richard added, "We want Rebirth to be more than just a successful company. We want it to be an example of how business can be a force for good in the world. And we're just getting started." After the interview, with Alexander already in bed, Richard and Emily were once again on the balcony, their favorite place for reflection. "Can you believe everything that's happened in the last few years?" Emily asked, leaning back against Richard's chest. He hugged her tighter, planting a kiss on her head. "Sometimes it feels like a dream. But then I look at you, at Alexander, at everything we've built together, and I know it's real, and I'm grateful for every moment." Emily turned to face him, her eyes shining with love and determination. "You know, when I think about the future, I'm not afraid. No matter what comes, I know we'll face it together." Richard smiled, leaning in for a soft kiss. "Together. Always." As the lights of New York twinkled in the distance, Richard and Emily remained embraced, contemplating the future. They had transformed a story of revenge into a tale of love, redemption, and purpose. Rebirth Cosmetics was more than a company. It was a testament to how love can flourish in the most unexpected places and how, with determination and integrity, it's possible to create a lasting positive impact on the world. The path ahead would still have its challenges, but Richard and Emily were ready to face them, side by side. They had learned that true success isn't just in financial results, but in the positive impact one has on people's lives and on the planet. As the night wore on, they made silent plans for the future, for the company, for their family, for the world they wanted to help shape. The story of Richard and Emily of Rebirth Cosmetics was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. And so, under the starry New York sky, two people who once planned to use each other now found themselves united by a deep love and a shared purpose. They had been reborn, just like their company, and the future had never looked so bright and full of possibilities.